Hi, and welcome back to the F-14 Tomcast. I'm Dave Bio-Baronic, former F-14 Rio and Top Gun instructor. I'm one of your co-hosts for today's episode, and we're going to talk about the Forward Air Controller Airborne, or FAC A program. I'm going to throw it over to my co-host, Crunch.
Hey, hello everybody. Craig Snyder, call sign Crunch, and I'm your other co-host today. And as you may recall, I too am a former F-14 Top Gun instructor. I was an F-14 pilot for quite a few years, and we've both been there, done that, and got quite a few hours and a couple of traps. And we're joined today by another gentleman who has been there, done that. Matter of fact, he was instrumental in the implementation of the Forward Air Controller Airborne syllabus for the F-14 way back in the mid to late 90s. I would like to present to you today retired Navy Captain Paul PK Averna. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys.
Excellent.
Hey, PK, to kick it off, tell us where you're from, how you got commissioned, and how you got into naval aviation. Just give the viewers an idea of who they're talking to.
Sure. So Earth-cooled dinosaurs came. I was a Naval Academy graduate, class of '89, went down to flight school in Pensacola, and actually was able to get right into the program without too much delay. Went through my primary flight training down at Meridian, and then moved over to Beeville, Texas at Chase Field for my intermediate and advanced jet training. Got my wings in '91, and then was able to get up to Oceana, selected Tomcats after my winging, and was able to join the fire wing staff waiting to start VF 101, and then joined the fleet in '93 with the world famous Pukin dogs.
All right, so cool. I forgot, I don't know if we mentioned this before, but you're a pilot, and I'm saying this because our guests, we're switching off pilot, or we have a pretty good mix of pilot Rio guests. So when you came through the flight training, flight school, how hard was it to get Tomcats? Were there still a lot of seats, or were they mostly Hornets or anything like that?
I think there was a good competition for a lot of people wanted to get into the tactical platforms. Starting off, there are no bad platforms in the Navy, but there are some that are better than others, and the Tomcat's certainly right up there. In fact, for me personally, I wanted to fly the Tomcat since I was a little kid. There were people that wanted to go out to fly Hornets, but to me, the big fighter was where it was at. So that was my number one pick, and I actually selected Oceana first, and that's what I got out of the class. We had, I think, an EA-6B and 2 or 3 Tomcat slots and 3 Hornet slots.
That's something that Crunch and I hear a lot. People wanted to fly the Tomcat that's why they got into naval aviation. So, okay, and then I'm going to ask one more question. Once you got into the Tomcat community, what you said you went to the Pukin dogs. Did you? How many fleet tours did you have, and how many Tomcat hours and traps did you have?
Sure. So I actually had one fleet tour in VF 143, and then I went to Swatslant, the weapons school there, and then I left active duty and joined the reserves. So at the time I left at the end of '98, early '99, I had about 1,600 hours in the Tomcat with about 450-ish traps.
Oh, that's a good trap count. So your Tomcat hours are mostly B models, right?
Yeah, I mean the B was the one for the Pukin dogs, but because at the weapons school we were flying all variants, so I have A, B, and D time.
Now, PK, you mentioned something in there that our listeners might not be familiar with, and you mentioned Swatslant. Can you give us a 30,000 foot view? What was Swatslant? What did it stand for? How'd you get there? What did they do?
Sure. So Strike Weapons and Tactics School Atlantic, or Swatslant, actually was originally came from the A6 community that was also at NAS Oceana, having their the preponderance of their air-to-ground munitions training their instructors. But when the Tomcat started dropping bombs, we needed to actually have a way of teaching the tactics, techniques, and procedures on how to employ the platform better in that role. So that's where we had Swatslant join, the Tomcats join there. And then eventually when the F-18s moved up, it became the Strike Fighter Weapons and Tactics School.
Awesome. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you had to go to Top Gun as a student before you went to Swatslant, right?
Correct. Yeah. In fact, my career path to get into Swatslant was interesting in that back when I was a JO in the Pukin Dogs, in between our first and second deployments, we had that inter-deployment training period, and we had selected, we had 2 slots. We had a slot to go to Top Gun and a slot to go to WTI MOTS 1. And I got picked for the WTI class, and so I went there while one of my squadron mates went to the power projection course at Miramar. And then after I left the Pukin Dogs, I had to get my A-qual, and then I went out to the first SFTI class out at Fallon. So this is where they had it became a 10-week course, including the air-to-ground stuff.
You got to tell us about Crunch. You're going to ask this, I think, but you got to tell us now. Tell us what's WTI and compare it to the Top Gun course.
Sure. So MOTS 1, the Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1, based out of Yuma, Arizona, runs twice a year the Weapons and Tactics Instructor Course, or WTI. And that is actually a very intensive course. Top Gun's a prerequisite for all their tactical aviators, but this is their graduate level course in how to do all 6 functions of marine aviation, which include how you integrate all the different combat arms together to deliver effects for the combatant commander. And it's a very intensive ground school and mission planning flight syllabus, awesome flying. And then the SFTI class, of course, was building upon the foundations of the air-to-air employment, which I think you talked about with Slammer Richardson a couple episodes ago. And then also bringing in the air-to-ground syllabus on how you train. Of course, there's a parallel in the SFTI and the WTI in that they both go back to their squadrons and are responsible for the training or the implementation of the training syllabus that is in place to make sure that we have a consistent quality of, I'll say, product for all the aviators.
So PK, you hit all the good ones. Did you say how long WTI was? How many
so
weeks?
I'm trying to remember. It was about 6 weeks long. It was 3 weeks of ground school where I didn't sleep much, and then 3 weeks of pretty intense flying.
Okay, got it.
I had to get waivers to go to the class because they had the prerequisite for being for a Top Gun, and they really wanted to have a 1,000-hour participant, whereas with SFTI, I think it was a 500-hour minimum. But I think I was remembering my third flight during the class. I was leading a 20-plane strike about 1,000 miles, all low level, up to the Utah range from Yuma. And we were doing low-level tanking off of KC-130s, and we had 2 Tomcats right behind the KC-130, and the wingtips were just about touching. I mean, I could glance over and see the Rio and the other cockpit's eyes real wide as we were sitting back there behind these props, bouncing around in the turbulence and ground effect below 1,000 feet.
That sounds like incredible flying. That is cool.
Yeah, there were a lot of cigarette hops out of that.
I'm going to ask one more preliminary question, and then we'll get into the content. Tell us where PK came from, if you can.
Sure. Well, when I was originally assigned to the fighter wing, I was waiting to start the FRS class for VF 101, and one of my jobs there was as the public affairs officer, and I would take distinguished visitors through the simulator and then on the flight line, showing them the airplane and giving them a sense of what we do. And in order to be good at that, I figured I needed to have a lot of time in the simulator. At least that was an opportunity to jump in the sim early before I got into the FRS, and spent a lot of time in there just practicing, training. And one particular time when I was just up by myself, I was doing some basic fire maneuvering against a constructive target out there, and I kept getting misses. I was shooting sidewinders at them, and I was in the heart of the launch acceptable region, shooting PK miss, PK miss, PK miss. And I got pretty frustrated about the 8th time, and I let them know verbally that I was very unhappy with the performance of the simulator. Well, I didn't realize it, but the fighter wing commander at the time was dragging a couple DVs through, and they're listening to me curse extensively. So he, Flats Flaherty, told the sim instructor, have PK come see me afterwards. And I got out of the simulator. I had no idea. He's like, Commodore wants to see you. And he looked a little pale. I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. I get over there. He's like, so what's up with the bad simulators? I'm like, yeah, so PK miss, yeah. And it didn't hurt that my initials, Paul Klaus, and my middle initial, it all kind of fit together, right?
Nice. Well, that's a good one, yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Hey, let's shift gears into what the meat of what we wanted to talk about today. We're going to talk about the FAC A stuff. And what I'd like to do is if you could set the basically from the beginning to end, just start talking, if you will. But you went to MOTS, you probably did some close air support, some CAS, learned some of that, went to Top Gun, and then somehow got involved with the FAC A program and started to introduce it. So walk us through that process. What happened there? That's a
Sure.
lot.
I'm going to back up just a little bit in history because it's important for the audience, I think, to understand how the Navy got into the whole forward air controller airborne business out of our community. I mean, I was actually in the first FRS class back in '92, delivering air-to-ground ordnance as part of the syllabus. So, you know, pulling up outside Yuma and El Centro, next to our A6 brethren at the time, and I had 4 live Mark 83s, 1,000-pounders, retarded underneath the belly, and they're looking over, and they've got the little blue death on their wingtips. It's like, yeah, we're here, Grumman Products, we're representing. But that was a very new thing for the community to actually be training our air crew on how to do this in a deliberate way. The fleet, of course, was working in parallel with that, learning how to drop the weapons. But back in '93, we saw a need case for forward air controller from the sea. And this was following the CNO's tenants at the time, forward from the sea, being able to deliver effects in a battle space in close proximity to our own troops. So the CNO syllabus actually was for forward air control was built and approved back in May of '95. So when I went through, after I got back from WTI, where I dropped about half my squadron's non-combat allocation or expenditure allocation in 3 weeks of flying, Brian Brewrud, call sign Brew, and Bernie Parker were actually the first aircrew flying FAC A with VF-32, had come back and were now working from NSOC to actually implement the syllabus. So I got picked to be part of that initial cadre that went through the CNO syllabus in '95 to be designated as a FAC A. And then from that, I did a tour deployed over Bosnia and Iraq doing the FAC A mission. And I came back, went through the SFTI course, and then over to Swatslant as an instructor. And eventually I took over from Bernie Parker as the FAC A program manager for the community, and then passed that along to Troll Patterson, JJ Patterson, before I left. From a historical perspective, that's how I got into the FAC A business. But we as a community were learning very rapidly, and there's a great history about how we studied closely the different services and how they were implementing their aircrew or aircraft in performing the FAC A mission.
Now, okay, great stuff there. Now, many folks who are watching, listening to us right now probably don't know what a FAC A is. We probably should back up a little bit, talk about the mission sets. What exactly does a FAC A do? And there's a pretty long list, I think,
you remember from
some of the things you did.
Yeah, sure. So, to start off with, a forward air controller airborne is an airborne extension of the terminal air control party or TAC-P. And that is an organization that works for the ground commander and coordinates the aerial delivered fires in close proximity to troops in advance of the ground scheme of maneuver. So there is usually a FAC or forward air controller that is in charge of that TACP. We now call them JTACs as well, who are the terminal controllers. But the forward air controller is actually responsible. Yep, go ahead.
JTAC stands for?
JTAC is the Joint Terminal Air Controller. JTAC.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And so the FAC is responsible to the battalion commander typically to say, hey, here's how you employ aircraft, and also and coordinate your fires from aircraft as well as the direct fires from artillery, indirect fires from artillery in support of your ground scheme of maneuver. So that he's an advisor, but he also has a couple radiomen with him typically that will be responsible for trying to provide communications across the battle space for all of the different elements that bring those fires to bear. So the airborne extension of that is brings a lot of value to the ground controller or the FAC on the ground. First off, for no other reason that the perspective is different, right? You're up at 20,000 feet plus. You got a much different view of the earth than they do, huddled behind a hill or buried in a foxhole with shots going over their head. So we provide a lot of things about the visual reconnaissance of the battle space. We can also use our sensors to highlight where things are out in front of them. Hey, be advised, this is coming up. We can pass along data from our data link capabilities to show them aerial images, whether from UAVs close by or from our own sensors, and give them that picture on the ground so that they can make better decisions about how to use fires that they would like. But because we have all those abilities of the FAC Airborne, we can provide that terminal control for them. So long as we understand their intent, we can take it from there and deliver fires at a particular time in coordination with their ground scheme and maneuver. We can do artillery air spotting, and when you would do naval surface fire support, 5-inch guns, 76 millimeter guns, we could actually direct those fires. And then if nothing else, it was a radio relay function because of line of sight. We could provide them better connectivity sometimes from where they were. But that's the real role of a FAC A.
Yeah, and there's an awful lot to it, and just for a little perspective for everybody else, I was a FAC A. I was not. When did I start doing FAC A? I don't know, 98, something like that, whatever it was. So I was a little bit behind you. You were one of my instructors just as you were turning over a troll there, and you look back on that time, and I remember at the time, FAC A was bombing for fighter guys, right? Because it was so exciting. It was so involved because not only are you're not just rolling in on a target and throwing a mark down and say, hey, from the mark, north 50, fire for effect. There's so much more to it you're managing the battle space. I mean, we used to sit there and I don't know if you were doing this, but when we were doing it, we would go out with grease pencils and actually write on the canopy in the daytime, and you'd have everybody stacked up. You're like, all right, over here at Point Echo, we got 5 aircraft stacked up at these different altitude. We got 2 F-16s over here, a couple A-10s over there. We got two Hornets over there. What do we got? We got some Mark 82s, and we got some rockets. What do we need on here right now? And so you're managing all this. And oh, by the way, somebody comes up and says, hey, I only got 23 minutes of playtime left, and I need to get into the target and egress, right? And you're like, bah! And that's not on my plan. And then you're working in some artillery and a mortar, and then you're hitting a mark, and then from the mark you're trying to do that. Oh, by the way, your raw gear's lighting off because you're getting shot at, and it was just so exciting. And I want to say that because like the way you just described it, it's like, yeah, that's what we did. But if you get into the airplane, I mean, you would get done with that, and you're like, you just land and be absolutely exhausted and thrilled all at the same time.
PK made it sound like you're sitting up there at 80,000 feet, just smoking a cigarette, having a soda and air conditioning and all that. But I got to go along with what Crunch said. I mean, I never did the FAC A mission, but late in my career, I heard a couple of our JOs going through FAC A quals in Fallon. And I'm sitting there. I was so damn proud of these guys because, I mean, I could just hear they were managing all this information, and I was just proud of them. I was a skipper, and they were in my squadron. I go like, God, those guys are great. But then the other thing is that another time I got into a jet that had been used for FAC A, and these were all training practice missions, and nobody cleaned the canopy. and I mean, it didn't bother me because it's like, this is what we're doing. But I saw what Crunch is talking about, just the incredible. It's like hieroglyphics almost, just covering the side of the canopy. Yeah. It was, it gave me a real appreciation for the mission. I mean, I don't know where we're going with that. Okay. So wait a minute. So was it on a FAC A mission, were both the pilot and the Rio qualified FAC A's? And did you guys, did you have formal coordination about who's going to do what, or did it just kind of emerge?
Yeah, well, by design, I mean, the Tomcat's a great platform for FAC A for a lot of reasons. One is a bigger airplane inside the cockpit. I mean, one of the reasons that we were just talking about grease pencils all in the canopy, you can actually write down everything that you need to do. And because you can look through the canopy at the ground, you're not really focused on that grease pencil stuff. You can look right past it. But the airplane evolved over time, of course, not only in the ability to deliver ordnance, but with Lantern as a targeting sensor, as well as a reconnaissance sensor. We actually, went to night vision capable cockpits. We got everything greened in the cockpit so that you could fly under goggles. We brought the ISLID, the handheld 1-watt IR laser, so that you could actually literally, and we let the Rios do that because pilots' hands full with their stick and stuff. And if they blind the Rio in the back with that 1-watt laser, we can still get home. But yeah, that was a fun time getting that qualified for us. So there was a variety of tools that we could bring to bear, but it was the loiter time. We had a lot of gas by comparison to most of our other playmates that were out there, particularly from the carrier. And then because we had 2 radios and 2 people that could talk on a radio, we could be talking to different people at the same time, working through coordination. And you learned a lot during the training about how you were able to hotwire the system to get information that was relevant for the folks on the ground to deliver timely effects. I had a couple of comments. Crunch, you mentioned about and writing on the canopy. I mean, you could always pick out a FAC A crew about to walk for a mission for a couple reasons. Number one, they had a red and a black grease pencil in their little flight suit pocket. The pilot was carrying a nav bag full of charts, and their bandanas that they had clipped to their D-rings were all filthy with grease pencil writing from smearing off the canopies all the time. So we actually that was a quick, convenient way. But it was the FAC A Flying Club. You had 15% of the air crew that were getting 70 hours a month doing most of the missions when you were deployed. That was because it was a critical juncture. You were facilitating so much activity on the ground, the effects on the ground, and all your air wing brethren would come follow you because that's where the action was going to be. They were going to get you in and out of the target area, deliver your weapons, and get you back pointed to the carrier safely, and doing all the coordination for suppression of fires, IDing targets, things like that. So yeah, they were exhilarating missions, a lot of fun, and a lot of responsibility on fairly junior guys. When you think about it, to your point earlier, Bio, about how well those junior crews were performing. This was essentially like doing a strike mission every 5 to 7 minutes, ad hoc. Let's go, and being able to put them together on the fly.
And you're responsible.
Everything. Yeah, you own the bombs for the
ground.
I mean,
this is one great thing about naval aviation. I guess the other services are like this, but naval aviation takes relatively junior people, gives them the training, and then gives them incredible responsibility. And both you guys have said it was exciting. I mean, because when you're that age and you've been trained and you've got experience, you're going like, I can do this, and you get up and do it, and it's like, okay, but we're about to get into the real world, I think. So Crunch, let me ask one more background question, and you guys were talking about it a little bit. Most of my Tomcat time was in the 80s. And in the 80s, Tomcat was strictly air-to-air. And, we were frankly, parochial, dismissive of the strike community. So when you had to stand up the FAC A training, was there pushback? By the time you came around to start the training, had people embraced all the air-to-ground missions? What did you find about that?
Well, I think the best precursors to the FAC A program that really socialized the air-to-ground business for our community was our affiliation with MOTS 1. I mean, we as a community embraced learning from the WTI course. We sent crews through WTI, and they came back to our squadrons with graduate level employment and organization of how to apply combat power, not just in a dedicated strike profile, which was our typical bread and butter air wing integrated training that we would do when it was NSOC back at Fallon. This was all about understanding the 6 functions of Marine Air and how there's really 7 related functions in naval aviation on how to apply power and how to support together the ground scheme maneuver. And ultimately, that's where the effects are taking place. The last 20, 25 years, there's really been no challenge to our air superiority capability. And so that, you were, as I think you talked about in the Slammer Richardson interview back in the early 90s, the realization was, hey, we got to get into this business. It's not, nobody's coming up to challenge us. When we light off the AUG-9 or the APG-71, I mean, they're turning tail and running away from us because they know we're up there. So how are we going to deliver value off the flight deck for all the JP5 we want to consume? And the WTI program, when you saw guys that were wearing the Screaming Eagle patch, that was a symbol for your sister services, particularly the Marine Corps out in theater. It's like, these guys know what they're doing. And that really helped the community writ large. And then because of that, the FAC A syllabus, we modeled that in large measure to what they were doing for the F-18D community in the Marine Corps. But we also looked at what the F-16 community was doing in Arizona, the tacos down there. We were looking at what they were doing in Eglin with the A-10s and how they were doing single-seat FAC A missions, so that we were able to combine best of breed in developing the syllabus. And so for that reason, I think there was generally speaking, we didn't really get much pushback. I think where we did get pushback from, I don't even call it old school, I just say from folks that were worried about how much time and NCA we were focusing on from a single mission perspective for a squadron that had to go deploy, was that this was a 9-flight syllabus and there were no waivers. You weren't going to get a rubber stamp going through the program. You had to actually go do the work. And it wasn't just your platform. You had to have all the supporting cast to provide in this individual flight events, or else you weren't going to get the qual.
And typically those flight events, you might be, if I remember, event 1 was like a single plane controlling artillery from the air. So you had to coordinate. We'd fly down to Camp Lejeune or something like that. And maybe there was other aircraft there, but not only us, but also the instructors are airborne at the same time in another airplane doing it. And then you go out and you're going to do low threat. And so you need 2 FAC As in 2 airplanes, plus all of the strikers, and they need ordnance, and you need the weather, and you need the range. Yep. And boom, you just burned all of this gas, and crunch, that wasn't good enough. You need to go do it again. And so guess what? Now you got to do the whole thing again. Or you go down in line and all these strikers are lined up, and now they're just going to go out and drop their bombs without a FAC A because maybe the instructor went down. I mean, you never know. It was so complicated and required so much overhead. It took a long time to go through the syllabus. I remember that. Even when it was a priority for the squadron, it took a long time.
I'm going to throw in another term definition, then I'll surrender the microphone to you, Crunch. But you said NCEA, non-combat expenditure allocation. I mean, back in the day that they said, okay, each squadron gets, maybe 3 Phoenix per year and 6 Sparrows and 20 Sidewinders or whatever. And each squadron got all that, plus, 20 millimeter and chaff and flares. And then when air to ground came along, they added air to ground. And the wing assigns that for every squadron. And so for FAC A training, obviously it took a big portion of that. And maybe the wing hadn't adjusted yet and said, you know what, all these guys are doing FAC A. We need to bump up their NCEA for certain types of ordnance.
And sometimes that was taken from another squadron, and that other squadron is sad. So,
yeah,
I mean, it happens. But hey, I certainly, I've got a whole bunch of notes here. So PK, as you're talking, there's gold coming out here. And I know our listeners are going, well, what about that? You mentioned Bosnia. Well, what about Hornets? And what about this? I have these down here, and I have like so many follow-up questions that I'm just going to start right there. It's not really a coherent thought, but I didn't want to interrupt you. So I'm just going to start ripping off a couple of questions here that came to mind. You mentioned, first off, you talked about modeling after the single seat community of the A-10 and the Viper. And then you talked about modeling off of the 2-seat F-18D community in the Marine Corps. Pluses and minuses, goods and others, compare and contrast Tomcat versus those.
Sure. So let's start from the mission and what it takes to do an individual mission. You mentioned low threat versus higher threat type of control. And the 9 flight syllabus that we used was designed to kind of walk you through all of these, and where you would start seeing the breakdown in a single seat FAC A platform to do those missions was really in the higher threat environments, because the detailed coordination of fires included the suppression of enemy air defenses that would coincide with your strikers coming into the picture, and in fact you as well as the forward air controller airborne. Because as we started off, I think the striker doesn't own the bomb. That was a challenge that we had to break the mindset of for the air crew in the air wing when we first started flying FAC A mission. They really their understanding of close air support was very limited in workups. But
So who owns the bomb?
the guy on the ground owns the bomb. And in our case, the person that clears them hot to release, there's only one person on the radio that gets to say cleared. That's either I'll say two, the ground FAC or the FAC A. Okay, you never say I'm cleared to release. That's a taboo thing. But it's because you have to actually position your airplane as the FAC A to confirm that the aircraft delivering the weapon is going to actually have it fly to the point of impact that you need it to fly to, and not be pointed or cross a line where your own troops are. I mean, this is all done in close proximity to our own troops. So by that nature, alignment in the unguided munition delivery meant that you were flying essentially perpendicular to the axis of delivery, underneath them, assessing their nose position to make sure that that weapon wasn't going to be coming off and go in the wrong direction. Obviously, with GPS weapons and laser guided weapons, we have a little bit of a different clearing process, but nonetheless, philosophically, it goes back to that's where it would start to break down, I think, for single seat. You couldn't manage the stack, manage all of the other resources needed for those higher end threat scenarios as well. And so you would have a secondary wingman trying to help you with some of those functions if they were trained. And so then you'd have two FAC As in two single seat airplanes working together to effectively do what we were doing in a single airplane. And of course, we also had the benefit too, because we had two outside radios and we had that third radio called the intercockpit communication system, ICS, to say, hey, I need you to go do this, or hey, I'm picking up this, or I'm calling these guys. So that, I think, is the real breakdown between single seat and dual seat. And for the Navy, for the at least FAC A from the sea, we focused on a 2-seat platform to be able to do that. So after the Tomcats retired, we pushed that mission over to the F-18Fs.
Mm-hmm. And so the F-18D compared to the F-14, and then you bring up the F-18F. How are they doing it nowadays? I have not done it in the F. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean the cool part is that the F is a lot bigger than the D in terms of fuel, as well as the size of the cockpit. You got a little bit more room in there, but you got a lot of cool toys to play with too that will help you in identifying targets, marking targets, passing data along. A lot of high performance data link capabilities there, which were just not available to the earlier platforms. The F-18D was a well-integrated cockpit. I mean, it took time for the Tomcat to get there for the strike mission or the delivery of weapons from the platform to the ground.
So comparing F-14 to F-18D, it's fair to say the F-14 just longer legs, right?
Better longer legs, faster. I mean, we could go get into a target area pretty quick and back out again, particularly in the Bs and Ds. In the higher threat CAS environment, we had a little more flexibility in terms of timeline management because we had the extra speed. But with that speed, we also weren't burning as fast, typically as the Ds were. But the F-18Ds, it really comes down to the air crew and how well they're trained at the mission. The benefit the Marines have is their FAC As are typically ground FACs for a unit on a disassociated tour. So they also have that ground perspective that we don't get when we're doing our disassociated tours, unless there was a very few of us that went to TACP school as an instructor, as an example, after we flew the mission Airborne.
All right. So PK, so you also mentioned that next on my list here is you talked about flying Bosnia as a FAC A. Can you talk some real world stories, actual implementation of the mission in the real world, and did you, talk us through? Give some real world history on it.
Sure. So in '96, the ground situation in Bosnia was changing rapidly, and in the early part of our deployment, things were pretty hot on the ground in terms of the Serbs making some incursions and actually making it pretty difficult for the Bosnians. So what I took away from that early on was there was a threat, a higher threat from potential surface-to-air systems that were influential in the region, and so we were doing a lot of coordination of standby stuff. In other words, stacking up capability in case the ground needed it. And in one mission in particular, there was a weather layer right about 2,000 feet, and the NATO forces had actually surrounded a ammo depot that was being held by the Serbs, that they were refusing to let it go, and it was getting pretty tense. They were pointing weapons at each other and yelling. And so when we checked in on station, the ground FAC said, "Hey, we need to show a force here to let them know that we're serious." And so one of the features of doing the FAC A mission is when you're on the flight deck starting up, as you're buckling into the airplane, your radios are on, and you're actually getting updates from the Direct Air Support Center, from the coalition forces on the ground, updating understanding of where things are, where the hot spots are, getting that real-time intel since you've got your intel brief maybe an hour and a half before you were manning up the jet. So we're on the radios actively listening while we're starting up and taxiing into the CATs and launching and getting our initial gas, going feet dry. So we're already aware of what's happening. But a lot of our strike brethren who are going to join us, we're getting them stacked up. It became very apparent that we didn't have the time to actually set up a dedicated 9-line kind of show of force mission. So I ended up peeling off and running down below the weather and thumping the ammo depot in full blower, and then reefed back up into the clouds where they could see the weapons on the airplane underneath it. And they gave up their guns right then. But that was just because we happened to be there and we're building situational awareness. I'm looking at my 1 to 50 while they're talking about where they are, and we're marking that down. And back then in the Bs, we didn't have moving map capability. We had the little Garmin handhelds, and we had our 1 to 50 charts. And so without that ground reference visually, because of the cloud layers, it's not until you pop down below it and all that training about how to orient rapidly, where the river bend is. Okay, here they are. Okay, and being able to execute quickly and then pop back up. That was just a natural extension of all the training that we had done. Flashback, because we made multiple ditch transits that tour.
Suez Canal.
Through time the Suez Canal. Yep. Back over to Iraq because Saddam was being anxious. The last time I went over in Bosnia at the end of that '96 cruise, things had basically gone away as a threat, and so peace was breaking out everywhere. And I ended up doing a survey of a potential range space for close air support training in Bosnia. So now I'm down at 500 feet, looking around at this would be a good avenue of access. So doing those airborne surveys for NATO, that was another thing that we did because we had the FAC A training.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. So interesting story you just told there, where you pop below the clouds and head on in. Just to give everybody a little perspective, if there's a cloud layer below you, you don't know where the ground is necessarily, and it's pretty mountainous over there. I've flown over there. There's some beautiful terrain, but it's really stinking mountainous. And I don't know, did you drop down over the water and press in, or?
No, I came down over land, and basically had figured out where I was going to be able to make a pretty safe entrance to get in onto the river and blast in that way.
Pretty safe.
Yeah.
Pretty safe. Well, that's pretty bold. That's a very bold move.
Sticking with that little vignette, when you said you thumped them, did you just give them a low, high speed pass, or were you supersonic? Because on the ground, an actual supersonic pass is much more impressive than.
Yeah, I was pretty much at the number. At least part of my airplane was at the number. Let's put it that way.
All right, cool. Okay, so moving from just show of force, as a FAC A, you carried a different ordnance than most Tomcats did. What were some of the ordnance that you used to mark targets and tell the guys where to drop, whatever?
Sure. So
did you carry rockets or WP or?
We didn't carry rockets. They were kind of a no-no on the boat for hero purposes.
Hero is high energy radiation or something like that effect on ordnance.
Yep,
nice.
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah. Well done with the acronyms tonight, Gaio.
Yeah, awesome. I tell you what, both of you guys, I am really impressed with both of you guys because you're pulling stuff out. I'm like, ooh, you threw out,
I'm trying to earn my place on the team, so. Okay, so let's get back to the mark.
So a great mark on the deck is a high explosive. Okay, from that bomb that just went off, 2 units of measure north. That's your target. Okay, and so we'll carry 4 of those shapes under the belly of the Tomcat.
500 pounders or
500 pounders is plenty. I mean, anything bigger is really, now you're starting to potentially impact, because again, close proximity to own troops, frag patterns, things like that, and it just wasn't needed. You will see from the air, if you're visually looking into a target area, a 500-pound bomb going off compared to most of the artillery shells, the 155s, things like that. But the best marks are to use not the ones on your own airplane, but others that are out there. So artillery is a great mark. If I can get a mark on the deck for air crew to then orient to, and if I can, and actually, if those marks can be HE, but normally we like to see Willie Pete because it's a nice white plume that pops up there in the battle space.
But fired by artillery, interesting. Okay.
Fired by artillery, yep. And LGB is an even better mark. If I can designate a target for a guy that's carrying an LGB, I'll put it right where I know that it needs to go and deliver the effect right there. So I don't necessarily need to mark the target per se, but if I have, like at nighttime, I might use a loom to illuminate the target area for those that are unaided to participate with us. But under NVGs, I can use my ISLID. I can mark the target from above, and people on goggles will see the thing. Oh, look, there it is. Or I'll use my laser designator, and for somebody carrying a laser pod, like on the Super or on the Hornets, they were carrying their Nighthawk pods. They could actually see where I was marking the target. So I can do that without having to actually do the original, what we call low threat talk on kind of cast. A mark, though, can be some ground feature that we all orient around. So an airfield, that's a great one because you've got orientation and units of measure that you can get people's eyes into the specific area that you're looking for. And even though they can't see maybe a tank under camouflage, you can get them to where they need to put the effect, and then the effect will go there. So they don't need to visually see it themselves.
Cool.
Yeah, but you brought a lot of tools to the table, and you learned during the syllabus, to learn during doing this stuff, that every platform had some pretty cool stuff associated with them that you could use in support of the mission. One time I was controlling a B-1 out at Fallon during a training event, and this was when it's like, well, how would you use a B-1 at range? Well, from where they are going to be camped out, they can put a SAR map into the area, or synthetic aperture radar image of the area, and they can help you. They can look into the area, and you can have them tell you what they see, and that helps provide that aerial reconnaissance while you're standing off. And that is important for the higher threat scenarios. We used to call it, medium threat CAS was where you're going to be running in 9 lines. You couldn't stay in the local area because of surface-to-air missiles or AAA that might be there. But high threat, you are going to have suppression of any air defenses, and it was lethal for you to be exposed more than a couple seconds in the area. So the higher the threat, close air support work that you had to do, the more coordination, the more time it would take to get ordnance on target. And so those whole ideas of getting people to see the same target, whether it was the guys on the ground, you and your aerial delivery of effects, to make sure that target correlation happened, that was the most important thing that you could do. So marking was one way of doing that.
Cool. Now you did bring something up just to clarify. You talked about Willie Pete. That's white phosphorus.
Yep.
So you've an artillery gun might shoot a couple different types of shells. One of white phosphorus, which creates this big giant white cloud. And I understand it's pretty hot and burns people up if you hit it. It's pretty bad, as opposed to an HE, high explosive, which just goes boom. So a couple of different things. You talked about Illum, and talk about what is an Illum and where do you get one from?
Well, so there's artillery illumination that can come up, or we used to have Lu-2s.
Yes, that's right.
Yep. So those were parachute delivered. There were small canisters that when they're pushed off of your bomb rail, the ITER, the improved now you're going to
triple ejector rack.
Yeah, the ejector rack. There you go, triple ejector rack. So in lieu of the Mark 76 practice bombs, at night we would have 6 Lu-2s and then 6 Mark 76s on those 4 racks underneath the aircraft. So 12 rounds to play with for marking or facilitating the training. But when you drop an Illum, we've learned how to make them reliable in terms of loading. There was a while there where we would have them dropped and we wouldn't get the thing to fire, but we figured all that out. And there's a window, I'll say, because you have to account for the wind and how long it burns, about your illumination run, on how you had to plan that to make sure that it would be over the actual target area that you would need it to.
That's right. So you'd have to sit to go, all right, the prevailing wind, I'm going to drop this at 5,000 feet, and the prevailing winds are this. It's going to take this long to drop.
Yep.
And windage, drop it here. And then you drop it, and then somebody would roll in, and they're like, I don't see the target. You're like, because I missed the spot with the Lu-2. And everybody's all off, and they got to go reset, and you got to do it again. That was a challenge. And of course, that's at night, right?
Yep.
And a Lu-2, and that's great when people are, as you referred to it, unaided. They don't have goggles on. But if you do have goggles, you mentioned the ISLID, which is an IR pointer. And as I recall, that thing looked like one of those big, giant Maglite flashlights from back in the day. And you had like a suction cup. You would slap it onto the canopy, and the Rio's back there. He's moving it around. And we even had eye protection that we put on in case there was like a laser flash through the cockpit, which every once in a while you would see like a flash come up the glass. But you'd put those little goggles on, and I remember you could use those as a pointer, and you could move them around. But that ISLID, you could not see it on your FLIR. But if you had a FLIR, a targeting pod like a lantern, you could designate a target, but you wouldn't be able to see that with your goggles. You could only see it on somebody else's targeting pod. So you had these two tools that like worked in different spectrums. And not everything could see it. And meanwhile, then you got visual. There were so many different tools, as you said, and you had to figure out, you're like, well, here comes Bio and his F-16, and he's got goggles, so I'm going to use an ISLID. And here comes this, I don't know, here comes a Strike Eagle who's got something else. All right, we'll just designate him with our laser. Yeah. Oh, by the way, if you're designating for them, because you talked about designating with a laser, you can use that laser to get somebody else's eyes on a target, or you could designate it yourself and have them drop on your laser code. Just a matter of that one's a little bit more complicated.
'Cause
I mean, you got
didn't they have to dial in the code or something like that?
Yep. As part of your 9-line procedures, they had to read back the code that they were supposed to have for their weapon, so that they would be guided off of the correct laser that might be out hot when they came in to release their weapon.
and you also had to worry about alignment, because at the time that they drop, you have to be in the right position not only to clear them hot, but also to have your designator on the right spot. And you had to worry about clouds moving across, and you had to maintain the designation through the time of fall. And you had to make sure you didn't get to a point where there was something called, you had to watch out for things like the pendulum effect, where it would go over the other side and get masked, or worse yet, in the F-14, the pod was on the right-hand side. And if you suddenly basically you could mask that laser with your own airplane as you're doing a turn. And so sometimes you'd be flying in and you're trying to get this thing lased, and you're realizing that you can't go this much further. There's like a threat over here or whatever the case is. And you're trying to turn, and before you know it, you're like in this right wing down, full left rudder, trying to keep the airplane going this way. Like, come on, man, 4 more seconds. And the Rio's yelling at you like, come on, Crunch, stop it. You need to get the laser on there. I'm trying. It was always a challenge. Bio's laughing because I'm telling you what, man, my Rios used to yell at me all the time because they're like, don't you mask the laser again. Don't you mask it.
I just didn't do that mission that much. And I guess I missed it. Although the flying was it just sounds great. It's challenging, but you practice and train and everything, and you go out and do it. And it's, we're quoting Slammer again, but I watched Slammer's interview again, and he said when you go out and you do it right, you come back and you go, that was good, and
that's true. That's true.
I tell you what, being an instructor, not only being able to do the mission, but to teach the mission and to drive the scenarios for the students so that they are getting realistic training and meeting the learning objectives. I mean, that is next level stuff. And it was awesome to be part of that team that was able to train all of our FAC A's. By the end of '99, we had over 150 FAC A qualified aircrew.
Wow, that's impressive. That is amazing. Okay, so this is a dirty laundry question, but were there any crews that came through that you guys said, sorry, you can't do it? Or by the time someone gets to Tomcats and gets to that level, you could make them a FAC A?
Yeah, but because of the minimum requirement, I think it was 500 hours minimum. You had to have the COs sign off, but it was also a division league qual.
Yeah, and so it's a pretty capable aviator by the time they walk into your schoolhouse. Okay,
exactly. And from that point, I mean, it is a building block approach. We don't throw them in, as Crunch was describing, the fire of trying to do a night FAC A mission under high threat with a lantern pod and some of the fundamentals of not masking while you're trying to illuminate a target in the right time and being in the right space. That advanced stuff comes as a result of going through a building block approach. And it starts off, the very first flight that we do is a low threat cast control where we're doing talk-ons. We're both orbiting the target area, and we are essentially learning how to communicate. But on the way to the target area, we are also exercising all of the connectivity on how we connect with the ground and get the information so that we're ready to participate in the mission. All of that has to be simulated going into the target range. So we might transit 50, 100 miles to get to a local training range where we'll do the mission, or do that initial talk-on mission. But we are exercising the students to the brain capacity because we're having them check in with all of the agencies they would have to check in with before they got to the target area to get the threat briefs. And that building of situational awareness is a part of the mission. And for the instructors, we're simulating all these different agencies, and typically we'd use different voice like accents and to try to make it authentic. There was one mission where we had we were simulating an EA-6B crew bringing in the seed support for a high threat environment, and the air crew came back and they're like, "Where was the EA-6B?" It's like, well, no, it was just a voice, dude.
Oh, you did it. All right. Good job.
Yeah. So, but
That's a
knowing
good
how they
simulation.
employ, knowing how they employ and the what they need to be able to support you in your mission, those were all parts of learning. So yeah, we put it all together by the time they got through their grad hop, and those tended to be pretty cool because you'd bring in all these guest players. You'd bring in Apaches from the Air National Guard out of Raleigh. You'd bring in A-10s. You'd bring in F-16s from Shaw. You'd bring in Hornets if they were available from the DC Reserve Hornet Squadron up there because they needed to do close air support training. Mentioned the B-1 from when we were doing the quals out at Fallon. So those are a variety of players, and you just didn't know. It sort of kind of mirrored the grad hop, the 1v1 grad hop that you guys were talking about before for 1v1 at Top Gun. I mean, that was varsity stuff.
That's right. You bring that up. And if I'm not mistaken, as I think back, I'd forgotten about this till you just mentioned it. You would walk on your flight and you would say, here are my planned strikers for today. I'm expecting the following things. I'm going to put them, stack them here. Here's their playtime. And you show up and you're expecting all this stuff. And all of a sudden somebody checks in and they say, hey, good afternoon. This is, Ranger 24 flight of 4 Apaches. We're checking in at 500 feet. And you're like, what the heck? Who are you and where did you come from? And how am I going to use you today? And then you're like, I don't know what just happened. And the whole thing blow up. And then you guys as the instructors would check in and go, well, it sounds like the weather over there at Shaw's, nobody can make it today. And you're like, oh no, it's completely changed. And of course, that was completely the plan from the beginning. You would give us this bogus plan and then it will blow up on the grad hop. And if I remember right, I actually think, if I can remember, I got a phone debrief with one of the strikers, at least from one of my things, where they called up and I go, hey, what do you have for us? Let me know. And they were mad at us. And they were mad because they showed up and like we didn't use them right away. And like there was probably somebody who went home with their ordinance because they never got a chance to get in because we never fit them in. And they're like, what the hell are you bringing us down there for if you're not going to use us? And we're like, yeah, sorry, I think I messed up. we apologize. There was some pretty, that was not intentional for sure, but it was a tough experience. It was very rewarding. Very good.
That's how you learn. So wait. Before we get away from this, PK, you worked with all the services and a lot of different and probably some foreign forces. Did anybody love the Tomcat, hate the Tomcat as the FAC A platform? I mean, you told us earlier about some of the attributes of it. Were those recognized by, in the community?
Absolutely. I mean, the cool part about how we built the FAC A capability on the airplane in terms of, and by capability, I mean the air crew being trained and then the tools that we brought to bear, in addition to time on station, multiple radios. That was a great package for all of our sister services, but also for our coalition partners. I got to work with the SAS. We had been out there at Fallon together. They were helping us with urban CAS and understanding how to deal with close proximity to civilians in built up areas and find stuff that didn't want to be found, technicals that looked a little bit like a regular Toyota Hilux pickup truck, but actually had a 23 millimeter cannon on the back of it, cruising around and being intimidating for the local population. How do you find that thing? And so we were actually out there with the city of Fallon. I was running around with the SAS in vehicles with radios, trying to work on being able to talk on our air crew operating overhead so that they could orient and quickly figure out where the potential target was.
Out in Fallon?
Yeah, out in Fallon.
Cool.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, you've got a bad guy, quote unquote, a simulated bad guy. He's driving a Toyota truck past the Walmart and taking a right at the gas station. And we got crews above the city. Actually, obviously no ordinance. We're not going to drop bombs on anybody here, but talking, seeing, hey, there's the bad guy. Okay, let's do a simulated run, or something to that effect.
Wow.
And we also got to work with the SEALs a lot because we were deploying with SEAL platoons on the carrier back in 94, 96 timeframe, going into Bosnia and stuff. And so working with them to provide their close air support capability, they only received limited training on emergency close air support control. So it was a lot easier for them to actually link up with us so that we could be that extension for them. And we worked with the local units there in Virginia Beach to provide them capability, on short notice, and really help them with their training as well as deployed as well.
That's pretty good. Yeah. So anybody who doesn't know, there's a lot of SEALs right here in the Virginia Beach area where we are, right there. But hey, so one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and I don't know if you have any experience with this, is the combat search and rescue mission. Did you have any experience with that?
Well, certainly training our FAC A air crew, because that's a natural extension, being the rescue mission commander role, because you're doing all the coordination of the supporting fires as you are having your extraction package move across different checkpoints to get to the downed air crew, pick them up in an opposed environment and get them out of there safely. So understanding that mission, I mean, it's a pretty easy one for FAC A's. You didn't have to be a FAC A to be a rescue mission commander, but that was a natural designation if you were going to be if you were FAC A qualified and you happen to be part of a strike package, that you would be the RMC if they needed it.
Yeah. So and if I remember right, that was not part of the FAC A syllabus back then. It was just something we picked up and did after the fact. And
Right.
like I remember when we did Desert Fox, I was part of that, and we banged off the front end, went, dropped some bombs, came back, and then the rest of the night, I was the Alert 15 hanging in the ready room as the CSAR RMC, just in case somebody got shot down, and
Yep.
we were just waiting to go. So I know that was something we did quite a bit, and there was a lot of training to it. And I personally thought it was a pretty complicated mission because, again, you're coordinating a whole bunch of different. You would have not only the concept of strikers, but you're trying to get this. The objective is to find the downed air crew, which may not be co-located, and then push in, get some helicopters or ground forces there to secure them, get them, bring them out. Meanwhile, you've got threats coming in on the ground or in the air. And so you'd have a fighter escort, maybe shoot the fighter escort to engage them. And then you got a ground troops in. So you bring in some cast players. I mean, you had the whole thing when you were running that. And I remember thinking that I personally found it pretty complicated, very rewarding, but very complicated to do. Never did it in real time, just in training and as an alert though.
Yep.
Cool. Bio, what else we got?
Do you think we've covered who's doing the FAC A mission now? Is it we already said F-18Fs, or E models doing it, or just the Fs?
So there was a big discussion after the success that we had with Kosovo, because we had several of our FAC A trained crews from the F-14 and 41 got several silver stars for their work over there in Kosovo as FAC A's.
Nice. Man, that's a nice award.
Yeah, I mean, it validated the syllabus, it validated the training, it validated the use of FAC A from the sea, and then it was, okay, how do we refine this? How do we expand this? How do we make it better for the next generation view? And at the time, there was a discussion. Well, we've got how do we get more FAC A's in the squadrons? Because the syllabus is long, and it's, as we talked about before, it takes a lot of coordination and resources to make somebody like that. Well, over time, we had the instructors rolling back into squadrons who had been instructing, and could they teach the air crew themselves organically? And we made the determination, well, we'll let them train through the first 8 missions, but the grad hop had to be done from a standardization perspective by a current FAC A at the weapons school that would come in and do that final flight. That was, I think, a good concession, meeting middle ground to increase the volume of those air crew coming through with the qualification. We also made it an AQD. So just like Top Gun has DB7 for their to designate an additional duty qualification on someone's service record.
Oh, an ADQ.
Or ADQ, additional duty qualification, AQD.
Okay, all right, good. I forgot that term. You mean that's that on that piece of paper that comes out that says all the things you're qualified to do?
Correct.
So FAC A became an official
AQD. Correct.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yep. So there's the formal syllabus getting designated for that, and then a certain number of air crew that are qualified in a deploying squadron. That model firmed up there after our initial success with Kosovo, and then it's where the program is today. I have not been keeping tabs on it recently on where they progressed, but the need for that capability remains, even though we are looking at the potential peer fight today. There's still that detailed coordination of fires in close proximity to your own forces, where all of those techniques are brought to bear dynamically. So for that reason, I think we will continue to see FAC A's from the sea for quite a while.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Good to know.
Man, PK, this has been a great interview and episode. You taught me a lot more than I ever knew about FAC A. I think our viewers are going to enjoy it also.
Yeah, I agree. This has been a great discussion, and I think I fully expect that when we post this one, we're going to have quite a few follow-up questions that we're going to have we might have to address. One last thing before we go, PK, what keeps you busy these days? What are you doing?
So I've been with Cubic Corporation for the last almost 4 years, and we're working on LVC for training, so live virtual constructive training, synthetic inject to live. So if you think about our current threat challenges that we face, our physical training ranges do not support that because of our expanded weapons capabilities as well as the threats. So what kind of environment do you need to train authentically? And that's a combination of having live aircraft working with virtual participants, folks in trainers, simulators, and against constructives and with constructives, both air to air and air to ground against those advanced mission threats. So we're now connecting live aircraft. We just did this in September, actually, at Pax River. We had live Super Hornets connected with F-35 virtual participants working cooperatively with a MH-60 Romeo TOFT, or Tactical Operational Flight Trainer, at NAS Jacksonville, connected across the Navy's continuous training environment, all working cooperatively to target a constructive surface threat out there, and being able to do end-to-end mission threads like with the long-range anti-ship missile. So those are the things that we're now moving into from a training perspective. And there are vestiges of the kind of environment we had to create for the FAC A program built in there, because you have to simulate some stuff. And to the degree that the air crew who are flying live believe that they are in that environment, that is the realism that you need so that you can make sure that cognitively they are doing all the right things at the right times in pursuit of their mission success.
Yeah,
so that's what we've been working on lately, and that's been a lot of fun.
That makes training a lot more effective, a lot more valuable. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That's great. All right. Well, gentlemen, this has been an incredibly, I learned quite a bit. We talked about some stuff that I'd forgotten about. And PK, I am impressed with your ability to bring back some of the memories and the details that you brought out in this conversation today. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you having you out, and we'll definitely, I expect that we're going to have a couple of questions that we'll have to circle back and get in touch with you on, because I might not know the answer. Bio might not, but I bet amongst all of us, we know somebody who does. All right. So thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning into the F-14 Tomcast.
Wow, that was some interview. It was a lot more substantial than I expected it would be. And PK is the personification of a subject matter expert. I mean, besides talking about FAC A and all that great flying stuff, he talked about a lot of Navy fighter and Marine Corps fighter training programs and other information. I hope you enjoyed it.